I'm here today with Jackie Stutz, who is also from PCADV. She's our training specialist. She has been training on issues of domestic violence in later life to the area agencies on aging staff and the case managers, as well as our domestic violence advocates. If you have any questions during the webinar, please type them in the box on the side, and we will answer those questions at the end of the webinar. In 2012, nearly 16% of Pennsylvanians, or approximately 2 million people, were age 65 or older. By the year 2030, it is projected that 28% of Pennsylvanians will be older than 60. As the elderly population continues to grow, so does the problem of abuse in later life. Family and PFA courts will see an increase in the number of cases of elder abuse and neglect as Pennsylvanians age. Courts will be faced with the challenges of identifying and documenting such cases and drafting appropriate responses. Older persons and those who care for them may petition for protection from abuse orders because the PFA Act addresses family or household members. Today, we are going to talk to you about what domestic violence in later life is. After this webinar, you'll be able to recognize the challenges faced by victims of domestic violence in later life and identify ways to enhance access to justice for victims of domestic violence in later life. And now I'm going to turn the webinar over to Jackie Stutz.
Hi, everyone. I'm so glad to have this opportunity to talk with you today about the topic of domestic violence in later life. We're going to start off our conversation with a quiz about some of the issues related to abuse that takes place as people age. As we go through the quiz, you'll have the opportunity to indicate which answer in the multiple choice questions you'd like to select, and then we'll review what the answer is one question by one question. In Pennsylvania, in 2012, 141 deaths from domestic violence took place. Of that number, how many, 3, 15, 20, or 31, involved persons over the age of 60? And the correct answer is, of this number, 15 involved persons over the age of 60. In those fatalities that took place in the last fiscal year, here are some of the situations that we saw described in the media. A 71-year-old woman was beaten to death with a pipe wrench by her 75-year-old husband. A 69-year-old woman fatally shot by an 85-year-old boyfriend with whom she had been involved for 30 years. He followed that by killing himself. A 79-year-old man died after his 54-year-old son assaulted him. The oldest people over the age of 60 who were murdered by partners, current or past boyfriends or spouses was 87. When we drop down to age 50, the number of fatalities rises to 29. In 8 of the 50 and older homicides, sons were involved in 6 of the murders. Grandsons, there were 2 of them who were perpetrators. In the examples that we have on this slide, the 69-year-old woman had rented her own apartment and was preparing to move out at the point that her boyfriend tracked her down and killed her. The next one is a true-false question. The majority of elders who are abused are hurt by a paid caregiver. Is that true or false? Okay, the response to this one is false. One state study found fewer than 5% of cases come to light. Furthermore, a significant number of elder abuse cases that are actually reported or identified end up slipping through the cracks due to a lack of coordination among service providers. Our next question, almost blank percent of people age 60 and older suffered some form of abuse in 2009. Are we looking at 5%, 7%, 11%, or 15%? For this one, the correct answer is C. 11% of people aged 60 and older suffered some form of abuse in 2009. Next question, and this comes from the National Elder Abuse Incidence Study in 1998. The study found that in almost 40, 50, 75, or 90% of cases, the perpetrator was a family member. And when we talk about family member, we're referring to spouse, adult child, a grandchild, or some other relative. Correct answer? 90% of cases, the perpetrator was a family member, which is why we're talking about the complexities involved in the decision-making for victims as a part of today's webinar. In a study of 257 older women, blank percent had experienced physical abuse or threat at some point in their lives. 15%, 23%, 27, or 32%. Okay, the correct answer here is 32%. And you'll note that this study was done in 1999. Which dates it a bit, but it's also evidence of, one, the lack of research that's been done in this particular arena of abuse in this age group, and it's probably an indicator that the number over the last nearly 20 years is somewhat higher. When the abuser was a spouse, husbands were blank times as likely to be the abusers as wives, 1.5 times, twice as often, 3.5 times, or 5 times more often. For this one, the correct response is twice as likely, 2 times as likely to be the abusers as their wives. In Pennsylvania, this translates in terms of services. When we look at the overall number of people served by the programs of the Pennsylvania Coalition Against Domestic Violence in 2012, 89,560 people were served in total. You'll see a significant majority of them were women, and of those individuals, 3% were age 60 or older. 2,111 of those women age 60, 303 men. The total that we have, the 89,000 plus, also includes the children as well as significant others who were related to the family members who came for services. Let's talk a little bit about what kind of domestic violence we're talking about. If any of you have had any training on domestic violence at all, or done any of your own reading, this definition should probably sound familiar to you. For our purposes, we describe domestic violence in the broad sense as a pattern of coercive control that includes the use of physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional and psychological abuse, as well as economic abuse. For individuals who are in later life, and we'll talk about what that age difference might look like, this definition will have some variances in it too. Physical abuse, we know, can range from a simple push or a shove to being thrown down a set of stairs, 1 cigarette burn versus 100 cigarette burns down someone's back. Sexual abuse describes any of those things, those activities that someone is forced to engage in that they might not have chosen to or initiated on their own. Emotional abuse is about the kinds of things that hurt me in my heart, the kinds of things that my partner, this person I care about, does to me that makes me feel less than sure or certain about myself and begin to doubt myself. Psychological abuse, these two are very tightly woven, but psychological abuse are the kinds of things that hurt me in my head. I really begin to wonder if I'm losing my own sanity, if I can't figure out or I can't predict what the future might look like or how to plan. Economic abuse affects one of the major areas that victims describe for us as the factor which causes them to return to abusive relationships. I just can't make it out there on my own, or as I grow older, I'm not able to make it out there on my own in the broader world. We know that domestic violence is a pattern of behaviors, one of the critical words in our definitions. It's not about what just happens once. It only has to happen once for someone to get the message that it could happen again. But in between there, batterers are using whatever strategies or tactics of control that work for them to get their needs met when and how they want. This is taking place in the context of an intimate or a family relationship, so we're not talking about situations in which someone is being paid to caregive or a fight that might take place between neighbors. It's somebody with whom we have a long-term relationship of some kind. In later life, this definition changes just a bit, but there are a lot of similarities. People over the age 50 will have been subjected to that same or similar pattern of coercive control and abuse. It will be involving a family member. It may be a partner. It may be an adult child, a grandchild, a niece, or someone else with whom they have an intimate, ongoing relationship. PCADV programs and domestic violence programs across the country use 50 as an age, a basis on which we begin to define older. And that's largely because of the differences from anyone who is in their 20s, 30s, or 40s, in that usually if someone's 50 years or older, their kids may be grown, they could very well be out of the house. This could be a period of life when physical ailments are starting to appear, or a general inability to locate employment if I decide that now's the point at which I'd like to become economically independent. Those kinds of things aren't so easy anymore as we begin to approach midlife and later. This wheel describes somewhat what the experience looks like for that victim who is older and who is the target of both the forms of control that we talked about in our definition. This can include, when we look at abusing dependencies and neglecting, it could include removing assistive devices if someone has a walker. It could be if I need certain kinds of medications, say to control my blood pressure or other conditions that I may have, either over-medicating or under-medicating the person who's the target of control. The isolation can look a little different. There's isolation that's caused by the perpetrator, by the abuser who cuts off my contact with others, but it might also be the isolation that comes with just growing older. As we move away from people we used to be close to, or we lose them, they pass away themselves, or they go somewhere else to live on their own or with their own children. It could include isolating me from my church if my spirituality is really important to me, no longer driving me to the synagogue or to services over the weekend. If I am dependent upon my partner for transportation, I may not be able to get to the doctor without the abusive partner being the one who's taking me. When we talk about later life, older victims, and you'll see here a different number, it's because most of the research still looks at 65 as the age of when someone is considered older in our society. So these kinds of factors are a part of what's appearing in the research. Older victims are subject to some forms of abuse, the same and similar tactics of abuse as a person under the age of 65, but their own ability to act or respond could be hampered by the infirmities of age. There's a video that we use in training in which an older woman who's in her 70s vividly describes how she knew she had been controlled all of her married life by her abusive partner, but physical abuse didn't become an issue until she started losing mobility and she couldn't run as fast as she used to be able to get away from him. And she suffered one of her worst incidences of physical violence when she didn't manage to get to the door to escape outside and get to a neighbor. And it might be their inability to reach out to services that could help. Either they don't know what services are out there, because a lot of them may not have existed when they were younger, when they were learning about what was in their communities, or they're controlled in a way in which they're not able to access those services. They may not have access to the phone if they're forced to stay in bed because the abuser keeps the walker away from them. They actually physically can't get to that phone. They can't reach out to someone who may be able to give them information about what some other options could be. So what kinds of barriers to safety do you think might be confronted by older women in particular? And as we looked at the numbers earlier, we say women here because it's a reality like the broader population in the other age ranges where this is a gender-based crime. Women are still primarily the victims, the targets of the kind of abuse that we're talking about. But look at this list and you'll see a number of things, some of which we've touched on already, but they become barriers to why older women in particular aren't able to reach out, aren't able to identify who it is that could be helping them. A lot of it having to do with the life stressors that come along with age, whether it's health concerns or financial issues about how I can begin at age 50, at age 60, at age 67 to support myself when I may not have had a job outside the home for most of my married life or the time that I've spent with this partner. And then there will also be cultural issues for someone who is older, who may still not have English as a primary language, has Spanish or some other language as their first language. Learning another language can be a barrier, or it can be difficult to reach outside my cultural community. I could face being shunned by religious and spiritual groups that were really important to me, as well as loved ones that I have in that community. Some of the other factors that affect my decision making if I'm an older person being controlled by my partner include that shared history I have with the very person who's hurting me or controlling me. Just knowing that at one point in time things were good for us. I don't have that history with anyone else, and tied into that is oftentimes shame related to having to share it with strangers what's been going on. For victims of domestic violence in later life who are older and they're experiencing abuse at the hands of an adult child, there's the embarrassment and the shame with having to talk about what this person I raised, this person I was expected to appropriately raise and educate about how people should be treated, that this child is now hurting me and putting me at risk. I may have concerns about whether or not I could not only make it on my own, but if I do rely on my partner as my caregiver, if I do have some infirmities or some things that make it difficult for me to get around or to reach out, am I going to be able to afford paying for nursing care, paying for someone to come into the house on a day-to-day basis? Oftentimes we hear victims in later life talk about the abuser is the one who needs care and feeling an obligation to continue to provide that care, knowing that they can't afford to pay someone else to care for the person who's been hurting them. And one of the things that a lot of older folks will talk about is that threat being held over their head that if you try to leave, then see what happens. I'll be sending you to a nursing home. That's where you'll go next. Here in Pennsylvania, when we talk about elder abuse, which is a little differentiated from domestic violence in later life, we're talking about a person age 60 or over who is subjected to each of these forms of abuse you see on your screen. And again, these are a little different than the definition that we use to describe domestic violence as well as domestic violence in later life. Material abuse includes things like financial exploitation. It could include abandonment, self-neglect because someone doesn't have anyone else to take care of them or to assist them. They don't know how to take care of themselves any longer, or they're not physically able to do it. It could include stalking, one of the things that is common through all age ranges. So when we talk about domestic violence in later life, we're talking about someone who is age 50 or over. We're talking about a group that is primarily women, but yes, includes older men. And in fact, the proportion of older men who are over the age of 50 and may be abused by an adult child or an abusive partner, we see the number of older men seeking services from our programs begin to rise exponentially. And again, it's a relationship that's ongoing and trusted. The scenarios that we describe are related to spouse and partner abuse primarily, and when we really examine and have conversations with people who are older who are being victimized by their partners, their intimate partners, if you ask the appropriate questions, even though there may be reports that the abuse has just started to happen, this is the first time I was physically abused and I'm 71, we talk about the nature of the relationship, we're able to peel away the layers of that onion and identify that it's actually domestic violence grown old. That in the earlier years of the relationship, there was always control. There was always some form of abuse taking place, but it just never reached the level that involved physical risk or fear because of physical harm. It could be a new relationship. I may have either divorced or am now widowed, and as I age, I find someone else I'd like to spend my later years with, and I don't realize that the person I've become involved with, or there aren't any markers that this individual that I want to live out the rest of my life with could be or is an abuser. There could be late onset abuse, that there are no other factors, and whether it's because of changes happening in the brain for the individual who is the abuser, who becomes more and more controlling, or just other reasons that the stressors of aging place upon someone. Those later life scenarios could include that adult child, grandchild, or other family member. It could include someone who's my caregiver, and it could also be perpetrated by the care receiver. When we talk about people over the age of 50, over the age of 60 or 65, one of the things that we know is there's an increased risk that someone will be developing or has started to develop some of the infirmities that come with age that actually rise rise to the level of disabilities that change what my abilities, what my capabilities are, and the things that I control in my life. What we know about abuse and women with disabilities is that they are 40% greater at risk of being victimized by someone with whom they have a relationship, and 3 times more likely to be sexually assaulted. This could be in that relationship. It could be once they've left home, actually are in a nursing home or some other care facility, and the partner or an adult child or someone else comes in to visit, and I could be sexually assaulted while I'm actually not even living in my home any longer. We know that women with disabilities are more likely to endure physical or sexual abuse longer, and they may stay longer because of all those increases in their needs and dependence upon others. There's that fear of being abandoned and who will care for me, who else knows better what my needs are, and again, institutionalization, nursing home being held over my head. In later life, we know there's active violence that puts someone at physical risk, but then we also know there are forms of passive violence that make it very difficult for me to make decisions or actually put me in a position where I'm not aware of or not understanding what's happening to me, like in situations where my medicine dosages get played with or tampered with, and I'm confused through most of the day or perhaps sleeping most of the day, and I'm not really aware of what might be happening around me. That ability for me to make decisions about my life are taken away from me in one way after another. Let's talk for a couple of minutes about the abuser mindset. This information actually is from a book that a man named Lundy Bancroft wrote, Why Does He Do That? Inside the Minds, Angry and Controlling Men, in which Lundy decided that he would take a look at the men that he had been working with for a number of years who were part of Batterers Intervention Services in Boston, Massachusetts. And he began to notice some descriptors about how they talked about what they did or took responsibility or didn't take responsibility for the violence or the control they were perpetrating on their partners. They all had in common the whole issue of control and entitlement. They felt that they could not only control their partners, but they had that right to do that. But in doing so, any of what happened as a result of the control or the behaviors that they engaged in had nothing to do with them. It was always about someone else. They externalized the responsibility. And even though it was all about me, it was someone else's fault. Lundy talks about the manipulation that takes place, the manipulation of people around the couple, manipulation of the truth, that rewriting history that keeps the person who's the target of my abuse confused and uncertain about what to anticipate or what they may have done or should do in response to the abuse. There's a general level of superiority and disrespect that these abusers hold towards their partners, and extreme possessiveness. And we see that in the fatality reports that PCADB gathers each year, in which a number of individuals who are killed by their partners, someone will have described, either a bystander or a relative, that the partner said, if I can't have her, if I can't have him, no one else will. So what kinds of protections are for people who are having these experiences? Under Adult Protective Services, here in Pennsylvania, older adult protective services provide for the protection of adults age 60 and over. Up until 2011, there was this gap in services for those over the age of 50 and up to age 60 who may have a disability in particular, who were aging out of other kinds of services. But in 2001, Pennsylvania enacted another adult protective services law for persons age 18 to 59 with disabilities. And that's closed that gap a bit, where domestic violence programs may not be able to provide for all of the needs for someone between the ages of 50 and 60 or over the age of 60. We're now partnering with area agencies on aging to begin to close those gaps. Under Adult Protective Services, their mission is to detect, prevent, reduce, and eliminate these forms of abuse that include neglect and exploitation, as well as abandonment, not usually covered under the statutes like the Protection from Abuse Act. The reports of abuse and neglect are screened and assigned several different levels. The ones that are important to understand, because if you're about to make a report, and we're going to talk in just a second about who is required and who can voluntarily make a report. If something is assigned the category of an emergency, there's an immediate investigation that will take place. If it's assigned the category of priority, there's an immediate response on the part of Adult Protective Services that needs to take place. And then the rest of these, there are other kinds of services that will be offered to an individual who can then make his or her decision about whether or not they will accept them. In Pennsylvania, when it comes to reporting, voluntary reporting can fall to any of us. Any person who believes that an older person is being abused, neglected, exploited, or abandoned can make a report to the AAA. Mandatory reports fall on the shoulders of employees, administrators of facilities like nursing homes, personal care homes, and home health care agencies. So the positions that you hold there in the court or the domestic violence advocates hold in our programs do not fall under this mandate. We can choose to report voluntarily, but we need to keep in mind that that APS process, the Adult Protective Services process, can quickly shift into an investigation, and issues of safety may take a back seat. The best practice is to talk with the victim about the potential risk, refer them to other services that can help them assess that risk and what safety steps could be taken so that they could be safe while an investigation was getting initiated, and to talk about any possibility of escalation if APS were suddenly to show up and initiate that investigation. Key points related to investigations and services is, once an investigation is set in motion, a victim cannot refuse an investigation. They have to allow someone in, and there'll be police support to make sure that this happens, that the investigation takes place and proceeds. However, whatever the outcome of the investigation, once the person is offered or services are suggested, the victim's right to self-determine kicks in, and that person, that individual, can refuse services once that case has been substantiated, if substantiated. So right to self-determination and the opportunity to refuse services of any time fall under the control of the victim at that point. I'm going to shift now back over to Jill, who's going to talk a little bit about what you can do there in the courts.
So as we talked about before, as court personnel, you will probably see an increase in domestic violence and later life victims. You will see protection from abuse orders filed by the elderly abuse victim or by a guardian filing on behalf of an adult who has been declared incompetent, or you may see cases in guardianship or in other civil or criminal cases. The one thing that you do want to remember about what you can do is provide options. Let the victim know what his or her options are and let them decide what track they want to take. Now we're going to look at the American Bar Association's recommendations. Now these were in 1996, but still very relevant. The first is to provide accommodations for persons with physical and mental challenges. And these accommodations could mean modifications to courtrooms or waiting areas, making sure that the courtroom and the waiting areas are safe, comfortable, and accessible for older victims, considering that ramps, railings, and adequate lighting all contribute to an older person's ability to participate in the court process. Also, accommodate the victim's needs pertaining to mobility, language, and communication, medication, nutrition, hydration, oxygen, and other medical treatment. Older persons may need more frequent breaks and more comfortable seating. Also, look at your offices. Are they accessible? Can they accommodate wheelchairs? Are the doors wide enough? Or is there another office near that would be more comfortable for an older person? You also want to look at scheduling hearings in the setting that best accommodates the need of that older person. So you want to take into account the age and health of the party. Make sure to speed up cases that ensure that justice is served during an older person's lifetime. And schedule cases to accommodate their physical impairments, such as the need for assisted transportation or limitations that impact their cognitive ability during certain hours of the day. You also want to explain the court process for an older person. They may be intimidated or confused. We know a lot of times PFA court is always scheduled at 8:30 in the morning and people have to sit and wait. An older victim needs to know that. There may be medications that they need to take at a certain time, or the chairs may not be that comfortable. They may want to bring a pillow to sit with them. Also, you may want to provide a tour of the courtroom and the seating arrangements. Point out where the restrooms are, water fountains that they could get a drink. If there's a cafeteria that they could get something to eat. Ask them if they have any special needs to be accommodated. You want to look at the capacity of the older person. It may fluctuate by time of day or medication. So like we said before, think about that when scheduling the hearings. Take steps to reduce the level of fear of an older person testifying against an abuser. And we would encourage the use of domestic violence advocates. They can be particularly helpful for older victims who may be intimidated by the court proceedings. Again, assist the older person throughout the judicial process by letting them know exactly what the process is and learn about the dynamics of elder abuse, adult protective services, and other aging network services available to assist abused persons so that you can provide referrals to those places. Now, I want to talk to you about a multi-site assessment of 5 court-focused elder abuse initiatives. The purpose of this study, this was a study researchers from the American Bar Association Commission on Law and Aging and the University of Kentucky College of Public Health assessed 5 court-focused elder abuse initiatives. And they looked at how the initiatives handle elder abuse cases, and they determined whether they improve the criminal justice response to elder abuse. The goal of this study was to provide judges, court administrators, policymakers, and funders with the evidence-based knowledge about the structure, process, and outcomes of these initiatives so that they can make decisions about whether to support similar initiatives. I'm going to tell you about some of these initiatives so that you can think about these and see if some of these would work in your courtroom. The first is the Elder Protection Court in California. It is a special civil and criminal docket for elder abuse cases, including elder abuse protection from abuse, their protection order cases. The second is the Elder Justice Center in Florida. It's a program that provides residents age 60 and older with assistance, not legal advice, but assistance in completing court documents such as applications for protective orders, referrals to legal and social service programs in the community, and case management services in guardianship matters. The staff also monitors guardianship cases. They act as advocates for older crime victims, and if desired by the victim, can help the older criminal defendants by providing referrals to diversionary programs such as mental health or substance abuse treatment programs. The next is the In-Home Emergency Protective Order Initiative, and this is in Kentucky. This initiative helps medically fragile or homebound victims of abuse age 60 and older to obtain emergency protection orders and longer-term domestic violence orders by telephone when they can't leave their home. They have a partnership with several agencies. They have a partnership with the nonprofit provider of aging services that administers the initiative, with the clerk's office, the family court, adult protective services, and the sheriff's department. The Elder Temporary Order of Protection Initiative is in New York. It assists eligible victims of domestic violence who are 60 and older and unable to travel and appear in court personally, or for whom it is a great hardship due to infirmity or disability in obtaining temporary orders. They have social workers and lawyers from the New York City Department for the Aging and the Jewish Association for Services for the Aged Legal Social Work Elder Abuse Program. They're able to provide emergency counseling, direct services, and other information regarding services for the elderly. And the family court and the clerk's office also play significant roles in this initiative. The next is the Elder Justice Center. This is in Palm Beach County, Florida, and it helps residents age 60 and older who are arrested for certain crimes, who are involved in guardianship proceedings, or who need assistance with other court-related matters. They provide assistance, but not legal advice, in completing court documents such as applications for protective orders or other forms, guardianship investigations or monitoring upon request of the judge, referrals to legal and social services programs, and accompaniment to civil and criminal hearings. After they did this assessment, looked at those 5 elder abuse court-focused initiatives, this study found that these initiatives improved the court's handling of cases involving elder abuse. They fostered improvements in the criminal justice response to elder abuse. They enhanced access to justice for elder abuse victims, and they helped protect their safety and prevent additional harm for elder victims. The study found that all of the initiatives enhanced access to justice, provided accommodations in either getting to court or dealing with the court process, provided services to the elder abuse victims, provide referrals to other community services, and made the court function more efficiently and expeditiously. This also found that access to justice was enhanced because the judges and the court staff involved became more knowledgeable about elder abuse. The judges and court staff became more sensitive to the challenges that the victims faced. And in turn, this impacted the other judges, the prosecutors, the investigators, public defenders, social workers, and others who were working with elder victims. What this report suggests is to have ongoing support from and collaboration with the chief judge and court administrators, as well as other judges who have the credibility with their colleagues on the court. Have the support of the key stakeholders from agencies outside the court, the law enforcement, area agency on aging, domestic violence programs, and other social service agencies that can give their perspective on elder abuse issues and how the courts could better assist elder victims. And this is a recommendation. Given the extent of elder abuse now, its anticipated growth, and the devastating effects that victims experience, these are clearly worthy goals. Judges, court administrators, service providers, policymakers, and funders in other communities should give serious consideration to supporting implementation of similar efforts, even in these times of limited resources. And this statement just reminds us that this is our role to help the victims who come before us, who come to court accessing and seeking justice. How can you and your court enhance justice to elder abuse victims? Well, look at those ABA recommendations and initiatives. Meet with agencies who work with the older community members and find out other ways to provide services to victims. And team up with your local domestic violence program to develop policies and protocols for working with older abuse victims. You should work with your judges, your court administrators, other court personnel, your prosecutors, your defense attorneys, and the security, and come up with a plan, come up with a policy on how to work with older victims or domestic violence and later life victims, how you can help them and how they can best access justice. Always remember to refer. You may not have all of the information, and we don't expect you to. That's why there are other programs out there. So make sure you know about those other programs so that you have their information and you can let the older victim know about their services. The domestic violence programs provide many services such as confidentiality, hotlines, emergency shelter, support and counseling, safety planning. That's a big one. If the domestic violence later life victim's abuser may be older also, he or she may not be able to get away. So safety planning is something big that a domestic violence advocate can work with them about. If the domestic violence and later life victim has to stay with the abuser, what kind of safety planning can help that victim? What can he or she be doing to keep them safe while still in the same house? Also, court accompaniment. As we said before, courts can be a scary place, very intimidating, especially for someone who is elderly, has never been through this before. So having someone there to support them is very, very important. We have some resources for you. We have on this page, there's lots more information, as well as the information that we sent to you for this webinar. You also have our latest issue of Court Access that deals all about domestic violence in later life. If you do not normally receive our Court Access, please email me, contact me, and let me know, and I will make sure that you are on that list or send you that information. Do you have any questions that we can help you answer on how to better assist your courts? All right, we'll just wait a minute and see if anyone has any questions or anything that they would like to share. And we do want to thank you very much for attending this webinar. We appreciate you taking the time out of your day to sit and listen to this, and also appreciate that you want to continue to help victims of domestic violence and victims of domestic violence in later life. Jackie, did you want to add anything?
No, I just appreciate this opportunity to talk with everyone who's on the line, and I hope you'll be working with your local domestic violence programs to coordinate services for victims who are older.
Question was, what about services for abusers? And that's something, we have batterer intervention programs. Currently they're being looked at. There may be some kind of other counseling in each of your counties. Also, when you look at the area agency on aging, there may be something there or something that they can help you work with. And that's why, again, we say, please get in touch with the local programs and other community services that could possibly have some kind of counseling or other programs that will help abusers.
Most of the domestic violence programs throughout Pennsylvania, if there is a batterers intervention services group of some kind, they'll coordinate with the local domestic violence program so they can provide information so that you have a referral for abusers.
Right. Are there any other questions? If not, again, thank you so much for listening to this webinar. It has been recorded. If anyone else who would like to listen to it, let us know. We can send you the link. That's all we have for today. Thank you so much. Have a great afternoon. And if you have any questions, again, just contact us. You can contact us. Our information is on here. We do provide training and technical assistance to the courts and court personnel, and we are here to help you look at those initiatives, look at those policies, and how we can help you better assist elder victims. Thank you.